What if the ground beneath your feet remembers more than you do? What if the city you walk through every day is not the first city that stood here, not the second, not even the 10th? What if beneath the concrete and steel, beneath the sewers and subway tunnels, beneath the foundations we think are bedrock, there rests another world entirely, not lost, not destroyed, just covered, just forgotten, just sleeping? Tonight, we descend below the noise of the present to explore a question that unsettles the familiar. What if civilization does not replace the past but simply buries it, layer upon layer, until memory itself becomes another stratum in the earth? The lights are dim now. The room grows quiet. Your breath slows. And somewhere far below, in the darkness beneath cities that never sleep, another kind of silence waits. This is not the story of Atlantis or El Dorado. This is something stranger because it is real. If this approach to history resonates with you, if you appreciate a return to patience and depth over spectacle, consider subscribing. Not because algorithms demand it, but because communities form around shared curiosity, around the willingness to sit with difficult questions instead of rushing past them, around the understanding that the past is not entertainment, but a mirror we hold up to ourselves, wondering what it reflects. Tonight, as you listen, consider leaving a quiet comment below. Where are you right now? What time is it where you are? What city rests above you, and what might rest below? The world was not always this way. Once, there were no cities at all, no streets, no foundations, no layers of concrete and brick and stone piled one atop another like sediment at the bottom of an ancient sea. Once the earth was simply earth, soil that shifted with rain, grass that grew and died and grew again, paths worn smooth by feet that left no names behind. There were no maps because there was nothing permanent enough to map. There were no addresses because no one stayed long enough to need them. The first humans moved across the land the way water moves across stone, following the shape of what was already there, never thinking they might one day change it. But they did change it, slowly at first. A fire kept burning through the night, a circle of stones to mark a place worth returning to, a shelter built not to last one season, but many. And then, without anyone deciding it would happen, without any single moment when everything shifted, people began to stay. They built, they planted, they dug into the earth not to pass through it, but to root themselves within it. And the first villages appeared, small clusters of mud and wood and thatch, pressed into the ground as if trying to become part of it. These were not cities yet. They were barely permanent, but they were the beginning of something that would never stop. Because once humans learned to stay in one place, they learned something else as well. They learned to build upward. And in doing so, they learned to bury the past. No one intended it. No council of elders gathered to decree that the old village must be covered over, that the memories of those who came before must be sealed beneath new stone. It simply happened. A house collapsed after a generation of use, and rather than clear the rubble, the next family built upon it. A street flooded and filled with silt, and when the water receded, the new street was higher than before. A fire swept through and left nothing but ash, and the survivors raised their walls on the charred remains, never thinking that what they were building was not just a future, but a burial mound for the past. This is how cities grow, not outward, always, but upward and downward at once. Each new layer compresses the one below. Each new generation walks on the shoulders of the last, unaware that those shoulders are growing more distant with every step. The ground rises, the past sinks, and between them, a widening gap. A forgetting opens like a fissure no one can see. In Rome, construction workers digging a new subway line broke through into a chamber no one knew existed. The walls were covered in frescoes. The floors were mosaics of coloured stone arranged in patterns that had not seen light in 2,000 years. There were no records of this place, no maps, no stories passed down. It had simply been built over, sealed away, and forgotten. The workers stood in the tunnel they had carved through time and stared at images of people who had stood in this same room, people who had touched these walls, people who had no idea that one day their world would become a footnote in someone else's foundation. This was not unusual. It was not even rare. In London, every major construction project uncovers fragments of previous cities, Roman walls beneath medieval cellars, Saxon timber frames beneath Victorian brick, Pottery shards and coins and human bones pressed into the clay-like fossils, archaeologists no longer express surprise. They simply document what they find, catalogue it, and watch as the construction continues, as the new layer is added to the old. In Istanbul, the ancient city once called Constantinople, once called Byzantium, there is a cistern beneath the streets that was built 1500 years ago. The ceiling is held up by columns taken from older temples, older palaces, older cities that no longer have names. The columns do not match. Some are fluted, some are smooth. Some bear carvings of gods that were already forgotten when the cistern was built. One column rests on the carved head of Medusa, turned sideways as if she is trying to look away from her own repurposing. The cistern was forgotten for centuries. The people who lived above it drew water from wells and never wondered where the water came from. They heard echoes in their basements and assumed it was the wind. They felt cool air rising through cracks in the floor and thought nothing of it. And all the while, beneath their feet, a palace of water stretched into the darkness, waiting. When it was finally rediscovered, no one could say exactly when it had been lost. There was no record of its abandonment, no story of why people stopped descending into it. It had simply slipped from memory the way a name slips from a tongue when no one speaks it anymore. This is what happens to cities, not dramatically, not all at once. They do not fall and vanish in a cataclysm. They are simply covered. New streets are paved over old ones, new buildings rise where old ones stood, and the past becomes a foundation, invisible and unquestioned, bearing the weight of everything that comes after. But the past does not disappear. It waits, in the soil between layers, in the stones reused and repurposed, in the faint depressions that mark where walls once stood, in the silence that fills spaces no longer remembered. It waits, the way sediment waits at the bottom of the ocean, patient and still, knowing that one day the water will recede and what was hidden will be exposed again. Or perhaps it will not. Perhaps it will remain buried forever, unseen and unknown, a world that existed and was forgotten without ever being mourned. This is the thought that unsettles us. Not that ancient cities were destroyed, but that they were simply built over, as if their existence did not matter, as if the lives lived within them were no more significant than the dirt beneath our feet. And yet, this is what we do. Every city on earth is doing it right now, building upward, paving over, compressing the past into ever smaller spaces until it becomes invisible, until it becomes nothing more than a layer of discoloration in the soil, a change in texture that only an archaeologist would notice. We do this because we must. Cities cannot stop growing. Populations cannot stop expanding. The present demands space, and the past is the easiest place to find it. We do not think of it as erasure. We think of it as progress, as renewal, as the natural order of things. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the streets are empty, we might pause and wonder what we're standing on. What was here before us? What will be here after we're gone? The ancient Greeks had a word for this. They called it palimpsest. A manuscript that has been written on, then scraped clean, then written on again. The original text is still there, faint beneath the new words, if you know how to look for it. Cities are palimpsests. Every street is a sentence written over older sentences. Every building is a paragraph that obscures the paragraphs beneath it. And we, the living, are the latest authors, unaware that we are writing on pages already full of stories we cannot read. Some of those stories are grand. Kings and emperors and civilizations that believed they would last forever. But most are not. Most are ordinary. A family that lived in a house for 3 generations before the roof collapsed. A merchant who sold grain in a market that no longer has a name. A child who played in a courtyard that is now buried under 20 feet of rubble and concrete. These are the stories that cities forget first. Not because they are unimportant, but because they are too small to be remembered. Because history, as it is written, prefers monuments to homes, wars to weddings, kings to cobblers. But the ground remembers everything, every footstep that ever pressed into it, every foundation stone that was ever laid, every grave that was ever dug. The ground is a ledger that never stops recording, and beneath our cities that ledger is thousands of pages deep. In Mexico City, the modern metropolis sits directly on top of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found a city of canals and causeways, of pyramids and palaces built on an island in the middle of a lake. They marveled at its size and sophistication, and then they destroyed it. They tore down the temples and used the stones to build churches. They filled in the canals and paved over them. They drained the lake and turned it into farmland, then into suburbs, then into one of the largest cities on earth. And beneath it all, Tenochtitlan still rests. Not as ruins exactly, but as a foundation. The Aztec stones are still there, inside the walls of colonial buildings. The canals are still there, now serving as sewers. The causeways are still there, now paved with asphalt and lined with streetlights. The city was not erased, it was transformed, repurposed, buried alive beneath its own future. Archaeologists excavating near the Templo Mayor have found layer upon layer of construction. Aztec beneath Spanish, Spanish beneath Mexican, and beneath the Aztec, older cultures still. Teotihuacan, Toltec. Peoples whose names we know only because their stones were too heavy to move. Each civilization built on the ruins of the last, adding their own layer to the palimpsest, never imagining that one day they too would be a footnote in someone else's foundation. This is not unique to Mexico City. It is the story of every city that has stood long enough. Cairo is built on the ruins of Al-Fustat, which was built on the ruins of Babylon in Egypt, which was built on the ruins of settlements so old they have no names in any language still spoken. Delhi is not one city but 7 cities, each built on the remains of the one before, until the ground level rose so high that the first city is now buried 40 feet below the streets. Athens, Jerusalem, Baghdad, Damascus. Every ancient city is a tower of ghosts, each floor pressing down on the one beneath it, each generation walking on the graves of the last. We think of archaeology as the study of the distant past, but in cities the past is never distant. It is always beneath us, always one shovel depth away, always waiting to be uncovered by accident, by construction, by the simple act of digging a hole. And when it is uncovered, we are confronted with a troubling thought. If all these civilizations were buried and forgotten, if all these cities were covered over and lost to memory, what makes us think ours will be any different? The answer, of course, is nothing. Nothing makes us different. We are adding our own layer to the palimpsest, just as those before us did. We are building on foundations we do not see, erasing histories we do not know, creating a future that will one day be someone else's past. And one day, perhaps not soon, but inevitably, our cities will be buried too. Our streets will become foundations. Our buildings will become rubble. Our names will be forgotten, if they are remembered at all. And someone else will walk above us, unaware that we ever existed, unaware that beneath their feet, a world like theirs once stood. This is the cycle. This is what cities do. They grow, they build, they bury. And the past becomes a layer in the earth, silent and still, waiting for time to remember it. But time is patient. Time does not rush. And so the past waits. There is something profoundly unsettling about walking through a city and knowing that you are not walking on solid ground. That beneath the pavement, beneath the pipes and cables and foundations, there are other pavements, other pipes, other foundations. That the earth beneath your feet is not earth at all, but compressed history, compacted memory, the accumulated weight of centuries pressed into layers like pages in a book that no one has read in a very long time. We rarely think about this. We move through cities as if they are permanent, as if they have always been here and always will be. We trust the ground beneath us without question. But that ground is not what we think it is. It is not stable. It is not singular. It is a palimpsest of human ambition, human failure, human forgetting. And it is deeper than we imagine. In Paris, the catacombs hold the bones of 6 million people. They were moved there in the late 18th century when the city's cemeteries became so overcrowded that bodies were literally spilling into the streets that the ground itself could no longer contain the dead. So they emptied the graveyards and carried the bones underground, into the abandoned limestone quarries that had provided the stone for the city above. The bones were stacked in walls, arranged in patterns, organized by cemetery of origin. Femurs and skulls, ribs and vertebrae, pressed together in the darkness beneath neighborhoods where people lived and worked and never thought about what lay below. The catacombs stretch for miles. Most of them are closed to the public. Most of them are unmapped. Urban explorers who venture into the forbidden sections report tunnels that lead to nowhere, chambers filled with water, passages that collapse without warning. They report finding objects that should not be there, altars built by unknown hands, symbols carved into the walls, evidence of people who came down into the darkness and never left. The catacombs are a world beneath the world, a city beneath the city, and they are not unique. Beneath Naples there are caverns and tunnels that have been carved into the volcanic rock over 2,500 years. The Greeks who founded the city quarried the stone to build their temples. The Romans expanded the quarries to build their aqueducts. Medieval residents used them as cisterns. During World War II they served as bomb shelters, and in the years between they were simply forgotten, sealed off, left to fill with water and debris and silence. No one knows how extensive they are. No one knows what still lies hidden in their depths. Every few years a building collapses into the earth, revealing a chamber that no one knew existed. A street subsides, exposing a tunnel. A basement floods, and the water comes from somewhere deep below, somewhere that is not on any map. The city above continues as if nothing is wrong, as if the ground beneath it is solid, as if there is not an entire labyrinth waiting just below the surface, ready to swallow whatever is built above it. This is the reality of old cities. They are not built on bedrock. They are built on themselves, on their own history, on their own ruins. And that history is not always stable. In some places, the buried city is so close to the surface that it intrudes into the present without warning. In Rome, workers digging a trench for new water pipes discovered a villa that had been buried for 1,700 years. The villa was intact. The frescoes on the walls were still bright. The mosaic floors were still complete. There were amphorae in the kitchen, jewellery in the bedrooms, coins scattered across the floors as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry and never returned. The archaeologists who examined the site determined that the villa had not been destroyed. It had not been looted. It had simply been abandoned and then, over centuries, buried by the gradual accumulation of soil and debris, by the slow rising of the city around it. The people who lived above it for all those centuries had no idea it was there. They had walked over it, built on top of it, lived their entire lives on ground that was hollow beneath them. And when it was finally discovered, it was not because anyone was looking for it. It was an accident, a routine excavation, a moment when the present broke through into the past and found something it was not expecting. This happens more often than we realize. Not the discovery of grand villas or royal tombs, but the discovery of ordinary places. Houses where families lived, workshops where craftsmen worked, streets where merchants sold their goods. These places do not make headlines. They're catalogued and documented and then, often, reburied, covered over again so that the construction can continue. Because the present has needs that the past cannot meet. Because cities cannot stop growing to honour every foundation stone. They uncover. And so the past is acknowledged, recorded, and then forgotten again. Returned to the earth, returned to the silence, and the city above continues to rise, adding another layer to the palimpsest, pressing down on the one beneath it with the weight of progress, with the weight of inevitability, with the weight of forgetting. But what about the places that are never discovered? What about the houses that collapse and are simply built over without anyone noticing what lies beneath? What about the streets that are paved over, the wells that are filled in, the foundations that are buried without ceremony or acknowledgement? These are the majority. These are the silent layers, the ones that do not break through into the present, that do not intrude into our awareness, that remain hidden until they are so deep and so forgotten that they cease to be part of history at all and become something else. Geology, sediment, earth. This is what happens to most of the past. It does not survive as ruins. It survives as absence, as a gap in the record, as a layer of discoloured soil that marks where something once stood but no longer does. Archaeologists can read these absences. They can look at a cross-section of earth and see the ghostly outlines of walls that no longer exist, of post holes that once held timber frames, of hearths that once held fire. They can reconstruct entire buildings from nothing more than stains in the dirt, from changes in texture and colour that most people would walk past without noticing. This is the work of archaeology in cities, not the excavation of monuments, but the recovery of absence, the patient reconstruction of worlds that left almost nothing behind. And even this is only possible in places where excavation is allowed. In many cities, the past is protected not by being uncovered but by being left alone. by being deliberately ignored, by being sealed beneath the present in perpetuity. In some cities, developers are not allowed to dig below a certain depth without archaeological supervision. In others, entire districts are off limits to construction because the ground is known to be archaeologically sensitive. These laws exist because experience has taught us that if we dig without caution, we will destroy more than we discover, that the past is fragile, that once it is disturbed, it can never be put back the way it was, and so we make a choice. We choose the present over the past. We choose to leave the buried cities buried, to walk above them without knowing what lies below, to accept that there are entire worlds beneath our feet that we will never see. This is not malicious. It is not even deliberate. It is simply practical. Cities need to grow. People need places to live. And the past, however fascinating, however valuable, cannot be allowed to stand in the way of the present. But there is a cost to this. A cost that is difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. Every time we build without looking, every time we pave over without excavating, every time we fill in and seal off and forget, we lose something. Not just artifacts, not just buildings, but stories. The stories of people who lived in those buildings, who walked those streets, who made their lives in places that no longer have names. These stories do not belong to history in the grand sense. They belong to the quiet, ordinary, unremarkable flow of human existence. The daily bread and daily work and daily sorrows of people who were not kings or conquerors or saints. People who were, in every way that matters, like us. And when their cities are buried and forgotten, their stories are buried with them. Not because they are unimportant, but because importance, as history measures it, requires visibility, requires monuments, requires something to survive. And most lives do not leave monuments behind. There is a term archaeologists use for this. They call it taphonomy, the study of what happens to things after they die, how bodies decay, how objects degrade, how information is lost. Taphonomy teaches us that survival is the exception, not the rule, that most of what once existed no longer does, that the archaeological record is not a window into the past but a keyhole, a narrow and distorted view of something infinitely larger and more complex than we can ever know. In cities, taphonomy works faster than anywhere else, because cities are constantly being rebuilt, constantly being torn down and reconstructed, constantly being adapted to new needs, new technologies, new populations. Every generation transforms the city it inherits, and in doing so, erases the city that came before. Not entirely, but enough. Enough that the past becomes illegible, enough that the stories are lost, enough that what remains is no longer a city but a fragment, a suggestion, a ghost. This is what archaeologists find when they excavate urban sites, not cities, but the shadows of cities, the outlines of buildings that no longer stand, the traces of streets that no longer lead anywhere, the remnants of lives that can no longer be fully reconstructed. And from these shadows, they try to rebuild the world. Try to imagine what it was like to live in these places, what it was like to walk these streets, to sleep in these houses, to wake each morning in a city that is now buried beneath our feet. But imagination has limits. We can look at the foundations of a Roman house and estimate its size. We can examine the artifacts found within it and guess at the wealth of its inhabitants. We can analyze the bones found in the cemetery nearby and determine what they ate, how long they lived, what diseases they suffered from. But we cannot know what they thought, what they believed, what they feared. We cannot know what it felt like to live in that house, in that city, in that moment of time that is now so distant it might as well be another world. This is the tragedy of buried cities. Not that they were buried, but that in being buried, they became unknowable. They became mysteries not because they were mysterious, but because the passage of time and the accumulation of earth have placed them beyond the reach of understanding. We can excavate them, we can catalogue them, we can display their artifacts in museums, but we cannot bring them back, we cannot make them live again. And so, they remain beneath us, silent, distant, forever out of reach. Yet there is something comforting in this too, something strangely reassuring in the knowledge that the past is not entirely gone, that it rests beneath us, out of sight but not out of existence, that the cities we walk through are not the only cities that have ever stood here, that we're part of a continuity, a long chain of human habitation that stretches back thousands of years and will perhaps stretch forward thousands more. We are not the first to build here. We will not be the last. And when our cities are buried, when our streets become foundations and our buildings become rubble, we will join the silent world beneath the earth. We will become another layer in the palimpsest, another story that is told in fragments and absences, another ghost in the ground. This is not a morbid thought. Or perhaps it is, but it is also a true one. We are temporary. Our cities are temporary. Everything we build will one day be buried or destroyed or forgotten, but that does not mean it does not matter. It does not mean the lives we live, the streets we walk, the homes we build are without meaning. It means, instead, that meaning does not require permanence, that the value of a life, of a city, of a civilization does not depend on whether it survives. It depends on whether it was lived. The people who built the cities beneath our cities did not know they were building ruins. They did not lay foundations with the understanding that one day those foundations would be buried under 20 feet of soil and rubble. They built for permanence. They built for their children and their children's children. They built with the assumption that what they made would last. This is what every generation does. We build as if we will last forever, as if our cities are the final cities, the ones that will never be surpassed or forgotten, as if the ground beneath us is solid and will remain solid, as if the streets we pave today will still be walked 1,000 years from now. But history teaches us otherwise. History teaches us that permanence is an illusion, that every city that has ever stood has eventually fallen, been buried, been forgotten. Not through catastrophe, usually, not through fire or flood or conquest, though these things happen too, but through the simple, relentless accumulation of time, through the slow process of one generation building on top of another until the first generation is so deep in the earth that it ceases to exist in any meaningful way. There is a street in London called Cheapside. It is a busy street full of shops and offices and people hurrying to appointments they cannot miss. Beneath Cheapside, archaeologists have found the remains of a Roman road. Beneath the Roman road, they found the remains of a pre-Roman trackway. Beneath the trackway, they found evidence of a stream that once flowed here, before the city existed at all. The stream is still there. It still flows, but it flows through pipes now, through tunnels carved centuries ago, invisible and forgotten. The people who walk on Cheapside do not know they are walking on a river. They do not know that beneath the pavement, beneath the medieval cellars and Roman foundations, water still moves through the darkness, following the same path it followed 10,000 years ago. This is the paradox of buried cities. They are gone, but they are not gone. They are transformed, repurposed, integrated into the cities that came after them. The Roman road became a medieval street, became a modern avenue. The stream became a sewer, became a piece of infrastructure that no one thinks about. The past does not vanish. It is absorbed. It becomes the skeleton on which the present hangs its flesh. But sometimes the skeleton shows through. Sometimes the past intrudes into the present in ways that cannot be ignored. In Turkey, in the city of Derinkuyu, a man was renovating his basement in 1963 when he broke through a wall and found a tunnel. The tunnel led to a chamber. The chamber led to more tunnels, and the tunnels led down through carved rock, down through passages barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, down through rooms and storerooms and wells and ventilation shafts, down 11 levels into the earth. What he had discovered was an entire city, an underground city that could hold 20,000 people, a city carved from solid rock, built by people whose names we no longer know, for reasons we can only guess at. The city had been forgotten, completely forgotten. The people who lived above it had no stories about it, no legends, no warnings not to dig too deep. It had simply been sealed off centuries ago and lost to memory until a man renovating his basement broke through a wall and found a world that should not have been there. Derinkuyu is not alone. There are dozens of underground cities in that region of Turkey. Some have been explored, some have been mapped, and some surely remain undiscovered, hidden beneath villages and towns where people live their lives never suspecting that entire civilizations rest in the darkness below. These are not metaphors, these are not legends, these are real places, cities that were built, inhabited, and then abandoned. cities that were covered over by time and soil and forgetting, cities that still exist waiting in the dark. And if this is true in Turkey, if underground cities can be forgotten so completely that no one remembers they exist, what else might be hidden beneath the cities we live in? What else might we be walking over without knowing? The question is not idle. In China, in the city of Xi'an, archaeologists have known for decades that there is an emperor's tomb beneath a hill on the outskirts of the city. They have known this because ancient texts describe the tomb in detail. They describe an underground palace filled with treasures. They describe rivers of mercury flowing through miniature representations of the empire. They describe a ceiling covered in pearls to represent the stars. They describe crossbows rigged to fire automatically at anyone who entered. The tomb has never been opened, not because it cannot be found. Its location is known, but because the technology does not yet exist to excavate it safely, because mercury vapor is toxic, because the tomb is so vast and so complex that opening it would likely destroy whatever is inside, and so it waits, beneath the hill, beneath the city that has grown up around it, an entire palace in the earth sealed for more than 2,000 years, known to exist but untouchable. This is another kind of buried city, not forgotten, but deliberately left alone, not lost, but inaccessible. A world beneath the world that we know is there but cannot reach. How many other places like this exist? How many tombs, temples, palaces, entire neighborhoods that are known to archaeologists but left unexcavated because the cost is too high, the risk too great, the disruption to the modern city too severe? The answer is hundreds, perhaps thousands. In every old city on Earth there are places that could be excavated but are not. Not because they are unimportant, but because excavation is expensive, time-consuming, and disruptive. Because cities have other priorities. Because the living must be housed and fed and employed, and the dead, however interesting, can wait. And so they do wait. The buried cities beneath our cities remain buried. Not because we have forgotten them, but because we have chosen to let them sleep. This is a different kind of forgetting. A deliberate one, a practical one, but forgetting nonetheless. There is a term for the cities that exist beneath modern cities. Archaeologists call them tells. In the Middle East, tells are everywhere. They are mounds that rise above the flat plain, artificial hills created by thousands of years of human habitation. Each tell is a city, or rather, each tell is many cities, built one on top of another, compressed into a mound of earth and rubble and broken pottery. You can see the layers from the side where erosion or excavation has cut through the mound. Bands of different coloured soil, dark bands where organic material has decayed, light bands of ash from fires, red bands of baked brick. Each band represents a different period, a different city, a different moment in time when people lived here, built here, died here. The tells are history made visible, made vertical, made into geology, and they are everywhere. Not just in the Middle East. Every old city is a tell, whether it looks like one or not. London is a tell. Rome is a tell. Istanbul, Cairo, Delhi, Beijing. Every city that has stood for more than a few centuries has become a stratified mound of its own history, with the oldest layers at the bottom and the newest at the top. We do not see them as tells because we do not see them from the side. We see them from above, from street level, where everything looks flat and stable and permanent. But if you could cut through a city the way you can cut through a tell, you would see the same thing. Layers of occupation, layers of abandonment, layers of rebuilding. The same story told over and over again in earth and stone. What is unsettling about this is not the fact that cities are built on layers. That much is obvious. What is unsettling is the realization that we are just another layer, that the city we live in is not the final city, but merely the current one. That one day, perhaps soon, perhaps not for centuries, but one day inevitably our city will be buried too. Our streets will become foundations, our buildings will become rubble, our lives will become a thin band of discoloured soil in a tell that future archaeologists will excavate and catalogue and try to understand. This is what happens to cities. Not sometimes. Always. It is not a question of if, but when. And the knowledge of this, the deep understanding that nothing we build will last, that everything we make is temporary, should change the way we think about the present. But it does not, or at least it rarely does. We go on building as if we will last forever, go on living as if the ground beneath us is solid, go on forgetting that we too will be forgotten. But perhaps this is not a failure. Perhaps this is necessary. Perhaps the only way to live in the present is to forget the past, to ignore the layers beneath us, to walk on ground that we know is hollow without thinking about what it contains. Because if we thought about it too much, if we truly internalized the fact that we are living on top of the dead, that every step we take is a step on the remnants of lives that came before us, we might not be able to move at all. We might become paralyzed by the weight of history, by the knowledge that nothing is new, nothing is permanent, nothing we do will last. And so we forget. We have to forget. Forgetting is not a flaw in human memory. It is a feature. It is what allows us to live in the present without being crushed by the past. But there is a cost to this forgetting, and the cost is this. When we forget the past, we forget what we are capable of becoming. We forget that cities can fall, that civilizations can collapse, that what seems permanent and stable and unshakable can, in fact, be buried and forgotten within a few generations. We forget that we are not exempt from the processes that buried the cities beneath us, that the same forces that covered Rome and Babylon and Tenochtitlan are still at work today, still piling layer upon layer, still pressing the past down into the earth. We forget that we too are temporary, that our cities, our cultures, our entire way of life is as fragile as everything that came before us. And in forgetting this, we make ourselves vulnerable, not to catastrophe necessarily, but to complacency, to the assumption that things will always be as they are now, that the ground beneath us will always hold, that the city we live in will always stand. This assumption is false. It has always been false. Every city that has ever fallen believed it would stand forever. Every civilization that has ever collapsed believed it was invincible, and every generation that has ever been buried believed it would be remembered. But they were not. Most of them were not. Most of them were simply covered over, sealed away, forgotten. And one day, we will be too, unless we remember, unless we look down as well as up, unless we acknowledge the layers beneath us and understand what they mean, not just as historical curiosities, not just as archaeological sites, but as warnings, as reminders, as evidence that nothing lasts, that everything we build is temporary, that the city we live in is not a permanent structure but a moment in time, a brief flourishing before the inevitable burial. This is a dark thought, a heavy thought, but it is also, in a strange way, a liberating one, because if nothing lasts, then nothing we do is wasted. Every life lived, every building built, every street paved is meaningful not because it will endure, but because it existed. Because for a moment, however brief, it was here, it was real, it mattered to the people who made it. And when it is buried, when it becomes another layer in the tell, it will still matter, not to us perhaps, but to whoever comes after, to whoever digs through the rubble and finds the fragments we left behind, and tries to understand who we were and how we lived. We will matter to them the way the buried cities matter to us, not as monuments, not as grand achievements, but as evidence. Evidence that people lived here, that they built, worked, loved, suffered, died, that they were human, that they were like us. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all we can ask for, not to be remembered perfectly, not to have our cities stand forever, but simply to have existed, to have been part of the great layering of human history, to have added our own stratum to the tell, and then, when our time is done, to rest beneath the earth like all the others who came before us, waiting quietly in the darkness for someone to find us, for someone to dig through the soil and rubble and discover that we were here, that we lived, that we mattered, if only for a moment. But there is another way to think about the cities beneath our cities, not as monuments to impermanence, but as something stranger, as something that challenges our understanding of what it means for something to be lost, because the buried cities are not truly lost, they are still here, still beneath us, still intact in many cases, waiting in the darkness. They have not gone anywhere. We have simply stopped looking at them, stopped thinking about them, stopped acknowledging their existence. In this sense, the buried cities are not lost to time. They are lost to attention, lost to memory, lost to the simple fact that we have turned our gaze elsewhere, toward the surface, toward the present, toward the light. And in doing so, we have created a kind of parallel world, a world that exists beneath the one we inhabit, a world that is complete and self-contained and utterly silent, a world that does not need us to exist, that would continue to exist even if we never thought about it again. This is what makes the buried cities so strange. They are not ruins in the traditional sense. Ruins are what remains after something is destroyed. But the buried cities were not destroyed. They were simply covered, left intact, preserved by the very process that hid them from view. In some cases, this preservation is remarkable. In Pompeii, the city that was buried by volcanic ash in 79 AD, archaeologists have found bread still sitting in ovens, meals still laid out on tables, bodies frozen in the positions they held when the ash came down. The city was not destroyed. It was stopped, caught in a moment and held there for nearly 2,000 years. When excavations began in the 18th century, what they found was not a ruin, but a city, a complete city, with streets and houses and shops and temples, all preserved beneath a blanket of ash that had protected them from decay, from looting, from the slow erosion of time. Pompeii is an anomaly, a special case, but it reveals something important about buried cities in general, which is that burial is a form of preservation, that the earth, when it covers something, does not destroy it. It protects it, seals it away from the elements, from weathering and decay and human interference, the cities. Beneath our cities are not ruins because they were never ruined. They were simply put away, stored in the earth like objects in a warehouse, waiting for someone to retrieve them. But who will retrieve them, and when? These are not idle questions, because excavation is not a neutral act. It is not simply the recovery of the past. It is the destruction of the context in which that past was preserved. When archaeologists excavate a site, they must remove the soil layer by layer. They must document every object, every fragment, every change in texture or colour. Because once the soil is removed, the context is gone forever. The site can never be excavated again. This is why archaeology is, in a very real sense, an act of destruction. Every excavation destroys the site it examines, not the objects necessarily, but the relationships between the objects, the spatial arrangement, the stratification, all the information that can only be read from the earth itself, not from the artifacts extracted from it. And once that information is destroyed, it cannot be recovered. This is why many archaeologists argue that sites should not be excavated unless absolutely necessary, that the best way to preserve the past is to leave it buried, to let it sleep in the earth, undisturbed, until such time as we have the technology and the knowledge to excavate it properly, until we can recover not just the objects but the information, not just the artifacts but the context, not just the fragments but the story. This is a strange kind of preservation. Preservation through abandonment, through deliberate neglect, through the choice to turn away and let the past remain in the darkness. It goes against every instinct we have. We want to dig, want to uncover, want to bring the hidden into the light and examine it and understand it. But sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is leave the past alone. Let it rest. Let it remain buried until we are ready to meet it on its own terms, not ours. The cities beneath our cities are not going anywhere. They have already waited hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. They can wait longer, and perhaps they should, because every year our methods improve, our technology advances, our understanding deepens. What we could not learn from a site 10 years ago, we might be able to learn today, and what we cannot learn today, we might be able to learn 10 years from now. The earth is patient, the past is patient, and we, perhaps, should learn to be patient too, but patience is difficult, especially when we know that something is there, when we know that beneath our feet entire worlds are waiting, when we know that all we have to do is dig and we will find them. The temptation to excavate is powerful, and in many cases excavation is necessary, not because of curiosity but because of development, because a new building must be built, or a new road, or a new subway line, because the present has needs that cannot wait for the future, and so the past is excavated. Not carefully always, not thoroughly, but quickly, efficiently, with the goal of documenting whatever is found and then moving on. This is called rescue archaeology, and it is how most urban archaeology is done today, not as a research project but as a salvage operation. A race against the bulldozers to record as much as possible before the site is destroyed forever. Rescue archaeology is better than nothing, but it is a compromise. A necessary compromise, perhaps, but a compromise nonetheless, because it means that the past is excavated not on its own terms, but on the terms of the present. Not when we are ready, but when we are forced to be, and much is lost in the process. Not just objects, but information. Not just artifacts, but stories. The stories of people who lived in places that were excavated too quickly, documented too hastily, and then built over before anyone could fully understand what had been found. This is the reality of urban archaeology. It is not the careful, methodical excavation of an undisturbed site. It is a frantic effort to save whatever can be saved before it is too late. And it is happening right now in cities all over the world. Every day, construction crews break through into ancient layers. Every day, archaeologists are called to sites to document what is being destroyed. Every day, the cities beneath our cities are being erased piece by piece to make room for the cities we are building above them, and we accept this. We accept it because we have no choice. Because cities must grow, because the present must continue, because the needs of the living outweigh the claims of the dead. But that does not make it easy, and it does not mean we should forget what is being lost. There are places where the buried city is broken through into the present so completely that it can no longer be ignored. In Athens, the ancient agora sits in the middle of the modern city. It is not buried, it is exposed, excavated, open to the sky. You can walk through it, touch the stones, see the foundations of buildings that stood 2,500 years ago. The agora is no longer beneath the city. It is part of the city, integrated into it. A space where the past and present exist side by side, neither one dominating the other. This is rare. In most cities, the past and present are separated by layers of earth and concrete, by the deliberate choice to keep them apart. But in Athens, and in a few other places, that separation has been removed. The layers have been peeled back, and what remains is a kind of palimpsest made visible, a place where you can see time itself, layered and compressed and on display. Walking through the agora is like walking through a cross-section of history. You can see the Greek columns, the Roman additions, the Byzantine walls, the Ottoman modifications. Each period has left its mark. Each civilization has added its layer, and none of them have been erased. They are all still there, all visible, all part of the same landscape. This is what happens when the buried city is brought to the surface. It does not replace the modern city. It coexists with it. It becomes a reminder that the city we live in is not the only city, that there are other cities, other times, other lives that share this space with us, that we are not alone in the present but surrounded by the past, if only we choose to see it. But seeing the past is not always comfortable. Sometimes it is deeply unsettling, because it reminds us that we are not special, that the people who built the cities beneath our cities thought they were building for eternity, just as we do, that they believed their civilization would last forever, just as we do, that they could not imagine a time when their cities would be buried and forgotten, just as we cannot imagine it now, and yet it happened to them, and it will happen to us. This is the message of the buried cities, not that we should despair, not that we should give up building or striving or creating, but that we should do so with humility, with the understanding that what we make is temporary, that what we build will one day be buried, that what we believe to be permanent is, in fact, as fragile as everything that came before us. This is not a comforting message, but it is a true one, and perhaps, in its own way, it is a necessary one, because without humility, without the recognition of our own impermanence, we risk repeating the mistakes of those who came before us. We risk believing that we are different, that our civilization is stronger, more advanced, more enduring than any that came before, that we have finally conquered time and decay and forgetting. But we have not, and we never will. The cities beneath our cities teach us this. They teach us that every civilization, no matter how powerful, no matter how confident, eventually becomes a layer in the earth, a stratum in the tell, a line in the cross-section of history. And the question is not whether this will happen to us, but when, and what we will leave behind when it does. Will we leave monuments, buildings that last for centuries that become the foundations on which future cities are built? Or will we leave nothing but a thin band of plastic and concrete and steel, a layer so compressed and so unremarkable that future archaeologists will barely notice it? This is a question worth asking. Not because the answer matters in any cosmic sense, but because it matters to us, because it shapes how we live, how we build, how we think about the future. If we believe that what we make will last, we build differently than if we believe it will not. If we think our cities are permanent, we treat them differently than if we think they are temporary. And if we understand that we are just another layer in the great palimpsest of human history, we might approach the present with more care, more attention, more respect for what came before and what will come after. But this is difficult, because it requires us to hold two contradictory ideas in our minds at once. We must build as if what we make will last forever, because if we do not, we will not build well. We will cut corners. We will compromise. We will create shoddy, temporary structures that fail long before they should. But we must also accept that what we make will not last forever, that it will be buried, forgotten, replaced, that it is part of a cycle that has been repeating for as long as humans have built cities and will continue repeating long after we are gone. This is the paradox of urban existence. We must act with permanence while accepting impermanence. We must build for the future while knowing that the future will bury us. We must care deeply about what we create while understanding that, in the grand sweep of history, it will matter very little. This is not easy, but it is perhaps what it means to be human, to create meaning in a world where nothing lasts, to build cities in a world where every city will eventually be buried, to care about the present while knowing that the present is already becoming the past. The cities beneath our cities understand this. They understood it when they were above ground, and they understand it now that they are below. They do not protest their burial. They do not rage against the forgetting. They simply rest, silent, patient, waiting for a time when someone might dig down and find them, or not. It does not matter to them. They have already done what they needed to do. They existed. They were real. They were home to people who lived and worked and loved and died. And now they are part of the earth, part of the foundation on which everything else is built. This is their legacy. Not monuments, not glory, not fame, but presence. The simple, undeniable fact that they were here, that they mattered, that they were part of the long, unbroken chain of human habitation that stretches from the first cities to the present and beyond, and one day we will join them. Our cities will be buried, our streets will become foundations, our lives will become a layer in the tell, and someone else will walk above us, never knowing we are there, never suspecting that beneath their feet an entire world rests in silence, a world that was once as real and as present and as urgent as theirs is now, a world that believed it would last forever, a world that, like all worlds, did not. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in buried cities, not the silence of abandonment, which is heavy with decay and loss, not the silence of ruins, which echoes with the memory of what once stood there, but a different kind of silence, a silence that is complete, absolute, unbroken by wind or rain or the passage of feet, the silence of a world that has been sealed away from time itself. When archaeologists first enter a chamber that has been buried for centuries, they describe a sensation that is difficult to articulate. The air is still. The dust has settled into patterns that have not been disturbed since the last person left. The objects are exactly where they were placed, sometimes thousands of years ago. It is as if time has stopped, as if the room exists outside of history in a pocket of preservation where nothing changes and nothing decays. This is not quite true, of course. Time has not stopped. Decay continues, even in sealed chambers, but it proceeds so slowly, so imperceptibly, that it might as well have stopped. And standing in such a place, breathing air that no one has breathed in millennia, touching walls that no one has touched, seeing things that no one has seen, the archaeologist becomes a kind of trespasser, an intruder into a world that was not meant to be entered again. This raises a question that archaeologists have debated for centuries. Do we have the right to enter these spaces? Do we have the right to disturb the silence, to break the seal, to bring the hidden back into the light? The practical answer is yes, because knowledge matters, because understanding the past helps us understand ourselves, because the information locked in buried cities is too valuable to leave undiscovered. But there is another answer, quieter and less certain, that suggests perhaps we do not have that right, that perhaps some things are meant to remain buried, not because they are dangerous or forbidden, but because their burial is part of what they are, because the silence is not an absence but a presence, because the darkness is not emptiness but fullness, because the cities beneath our cities are not waiting to be discovered, they are simply resting, and in disturbing that rest we change them fundamentally. We transform them from complete worlds into fragments, from places into artifacts, from homes into exhibits. This is the cost of excavation. Not just the destruction of context, but the destruction of completeness, the transformation of a world into a collection of objects, and once that transformation has occurred, it cannot be undone. But we excavate anyway, because we must, because the alternative is to let the past remain unknown, and that is a kind of death too, a death of memory, a death of understanding, a death of the connection between past and present that makes us human. And so we dig, we break the seals, we enter the silence, we bring the buried cities back into the world, knowing that in doing so, we change them irrevocably, knowing that what we find will never again be what it was, knowing that the act of discovery is also an act of destruction. This is the tragedy of archaeology, and it is also its necessity, because without it, the buried cities would remain forever unknown, forever silent, forever sealed in the earth, and perhaps that would be fitting. Perhaps that is what they deserve. But it is not what we can allow, because we are human, and humans need to know, need to understand, need to reach into the darkness and pull out whatever we can find, even if what we find is broken and incomplete and forever changed by the act of finding it. The cities beneath our cities do not care about any of this. They do not have opinions about whether they should be excavated or left alone. They are not waiting for anything. They are simply there, existing in the only way that buried cities can exist, in silence, in darkness, in a state of preservation that is also a state of suspension, neither fully present nor fully absent, neither alive nor dead. They are like memories that have been forgotten but not erased, like words that have been spoken but not heard, like stories that have been written but not read. They exist in a liminal space between being and not being, between past and present, between known and unknown. And they will remain in that space until someone chooses to pull them out of it, or until they are buried so deep, covered by so many layers, that they pass beyond the reach of excavation altogether and become geology, become stone, become part of the earth in a way that is final and irreversible. This is what happens eventually to all buried cities. They are compressed by the weight of everything above them. The wooden structures decay, the brick crumbles, the stone shifts and settles, the spaces between things fill with soil and debris, and slowly, over centuries or millennia, the city ceases to be a city and becomes a layer of rock, a stratum in the geological record. At this point, it is no longer archaeologically accessible. It cannot be excavated because there is nothing left to excavate. The city has been transformed so completely that it no longer exists as a city at all. It exists only as a memory of a city, a trace, a suggestion in the stone that something once stood here. This is the final stage of burial, the point at which the city passes from history into geology, from human time into deep time, from something that can be remembered into something that can only be inferred. Most cities never reach this point. Most are excavated long before they have a chance to become stone. But some do. Some are buried so deep, so thoroughly, that they will never be found, never be excavated, never be known. They will remain in the earth forever, part of the slow cycling of rock and sediment that has nothing to do with human history and everything to do with the deep processes of the planet itself. These cities are the truly lost cities, not lost because they were destroyed or abandoned, but lost because they have passed beyond the reach of memory, beyond the reach of excavation, beyond the reach of anything except the patient, indifferent processes of geology. They are gone in a way that the other buried cities are not, gone completely, gone forever, and yet they existed. People lived in them, built them, loved them, believed they would last forever, and perhaps, in a sense, they have lasted forever. Just not in a form that anyone would recognize, not as cities, but as rock, as sediment, as part of the deep structure of the earth itself. This is a kind of immortality, a strange, impersonal, inhuman kind of immortality, but immortality nonetheless. The city no longer exists as a city, but it exists, compressed into stone, integrated into the planet, part of the slow, vast cycles that operate on timescales so long that human history becomes a blink, a moment, a thin band of peculiar rock that some geologist millions of years from now might notice and wonder about briefly before moving on. Is this comforting? Is there something reassuring in the knowledge that even when everything is forgotten, even when the city has been compressed beyond recognition, even when it has passed from history into geology, it still exists? Or is it the opposite of comforting? Is it terrifying to think that everything we build, everything we care about, everything we believe matters will one day be nothing more than a layer of rock? Fossil, a curiosity, a geological anomaly that exists only to mark a moment in time when something unusual happened on the surface of the planet, when creatures built structures, when they created cities, when they believed, for a brief moment, that they could impose order on the world. And then they were gone, and the world continued, and the rock remembers them only as a thin line of altered sediment. Nothing more. The answer is that it is both. It is comforting and terrifying at once. Comforting because it means that nothing is ever truly lost, that everything that ever existed continues to exist in some form, even if that form is unrecognizable. Terrifying because it means that existence without meaning is possible, that the city can exist as rock without anyone knowing it was ever a city. That our lives, our works, our civilizations can persist in the geological record without anyone understanding what they were or why they mattered. This is the ultimate fate of the buried. Cities, not forgetting exactly, but transformation. The transformation of meaning into matter, of story into stone, of human history into planetary history. And in that transformation, everything that made the city a city is lost. Everything that made it human. Everything that made it matter. What remains is only the fact of its existence, the bare minimal truth that it was here, that it was real, that it occupied space and time, but nothing more. No context, no story, no understanding, just existence, pure and simple and empty of meaning. Is this enough? Is the fact of existence sufficient, even when stripped of all context and meaning? Philosophy has debated this question for thousands of years and has not found an answer. Perhaps there is no answer. Perhaps it is a question each person must answer for themselves, based on what they believe about existence and meaning, and the relationship between the two. But the buried cities do not care about philosophy. They do not need to answer this question. They simply exist, in whatever form they exist, as cities or as ruins or as layers of rock. And their existence is a fact, an undeniable, irreducible fact that persists regardless of whether anyone knows about it, or understands it, or cares about it. This is what the buried cities teach us, if we are willing to learn. That existence is primary, that it comes before meaning, before understanding, before memory, that the fact of being here, of occupying space and time, is fundamental in a way that nothing else is, and that this fact persists even when everything else has been stripped away. But we are not rocks. We are not geological formations. We are humans. And for humans, meaning matters. Context matters. Story matters. We cannot be satisfied with mere existence. We need to know what things mean, why they matter, how they connect to us and to each other. And so we excavate. We dig through the layers. We piece together fragments. We reconstruct stories from broken pottery and collapsed walls and thin bands of discoloured soil. We do this because we must. Because without meaning, existence is unbearable. Because without story, we are lost. Because without connection to the past, we cannot understand the present or imagine the future. This is why the buried cities matter. Not because they are impressive or beautiful or full of treasures, though some of them are, but because they are evidence of other lives, other stories, other ways of being human. They tell us that the way we live now is not the only way, that the cities we build now are not the only cities, that there have been other civilizations, other cultures, other moments of human flourishing. And all of them passed. All of them were buried. All of them were forgotten. and yet they existed. And in their existence, they prove something important. They prove that human life is resilient, that it persists, that it finds ways to continue even in the face of inevitable decay and forgetting. The cities beneath our cities are not monuments to failure. They are monuments to continuity, to the fact that humans have always built cities, have always created order out of chaos, have always tried to make permanent structures in an impermanent world, and have always failed in the sense that nothing they built lasted forever, but have also always succeeded in the sense that they did build, they did create, they did live, and their lives mattered to them, to their children, to their communities, and now, thousands of years later, to us. Because we find them, we excavate them, we study them, we try to understand them, and in doing so, we create a connection across time, a thread that links us to people we will never meet, who lived in cities we will never see as they were, who spoke languages we cannot speak and believed things we cannot believe, but who were, nonetheless, human, like us, building cities, like us, hoping those cities would last, like us, and discovering, as we will discover, that they did not. This is the pattern. This is the cycle. Build, inhabit, abandon, bury, forget, discover, remember. It has repeated for as long as humans have built cities. It is repeating now. It will continue to repeat long after we are gone. The cities we are building today will one day be the cities beneath someone else's cities. The streets we walk will be foundations. The buildings we construct will be ruins or layers of compressed rock. And someone, someday, will dig through the rubble and find fragments of our lives and try to understand what we were doing here, what we believed, what we hoped for, what we feared, and they will piece together a story from the fragments, a story that is probably not quite accurate, that misses important details, that gets some things wrong, but a story nonetheless, a story that connects them to us across the vast gulf of time, a story that proves we existed, that we mattered, that we were here, and perhaps that is all we can ask for, not perfect memory, not immortality, not monuments that last forever, but simply this, that someone someday will find evidence that we were here, that we built cities, that we lived in them, that we were human, with all the complexity and contradiction that implies, that we created meaning in a world where nothing lasts, that we built for the future even though we knew the future would bury us, that we cared about the present even though we knew the present was already becoming the past. This is what the buried cities offer us, not answers, not comfort, not reassurance, but connection. The knowledge that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that has been continuing for thousands of years and will continue for thousands more, a long, unbroken chain of human habitation, human creation, human hope. And when we are buried, when we become part of the cities beneath the cities, we will join that chain. We will become part of the evidence, part of the story, part of the great palimpsest of human history that is written in layers of earth and stone and silence. The night is deep now. The city above is quiet. The streets are empty. The lights are dim. And somewhere far below, in the darkness beneath foundations and sewers and subway tunnels, other cities rest in silence. Cities that were once as alive as ours is now, as busy, as full of people and noise and hope. Cities that believed they would last forever. Cities that did not. They are still there, still intact in many cases, still waiting in the darkness. Not for discovery necessarily, not for excavation, not for us to find them and bring them back into the light, but simply waiting, existing in the only way that buried cities can exist, in silence, in stillness, in a state between memory and forgetting, between presence and absence, between being and not being. They are neither lost nor found, neither destroyed nor preserved. They are simply there, beneath us, always beneath us, a reminder that the ground we walk on is not solid, that the city we live in is not the first, that we are not alone in the present but surrounded by the past, if only we choose to remember it. And tonight, as you rest, as your breathing slows and the room grows quiet around you, consider this. Consider that beneath your feet, perhaps only a few meters down, perhaps deeper, there may be walls that once held families floors that once felt footsteps, hearths that once held fire, doorways that once opened and closed, rooms that once echoed with voices, lives that were lived in spaces that no longer have names, people who are no longer remembered, but who are here, who existed, who mattered, if only for a moment. They are still there, still beneath us, still waiting in the silence, not gone, not destroyed, just covered, just forgotten, just sleeping. And one day, perhaps, they will be found, or perhaps they will not. Perhaps they will remain buried forever, passing from history into geology, from memory into matter, from story into stone. But either way, they will have existed. And that perhaps is enough. The cities beneath our cities do not ask to be remembered. They do not require monuments or recognition. They simply are, existing in the darkness, waiting in the silence, bearing the weight of everything that has been built above them. And they do this without complaint, without protest, without any expectation of reward. They do it because that is what buried cities do. They hold up the present. They provide the foundation on which everything else is built. They are the past made solid, made structural, made essential. Without them, the present would not exist. Without them, we would have no ground to stand on, and so they matter. Not because they are remembered, but because they are there, always beneath us, always supporting the weight of the world above them. This is their role, this is their purpose, this is what they have become, and it is enough. Sleep now. Let the city grow quiet around you. Let the noise fade. Let the lights dim. Let your breathing slow. And as you drift towards sleep, remember that you are not alone, that beneath you, in the darkness, in the silence, in the deep layers of earth and stone, other worlds rest. Other cities sleep. Other lives wait in the stillness. They are not lost. They are not gone. They are simply beneath you, always beneath you, and they will be there when you wake, and they will be there long after you're gone, sleeping their deep sleep, waiting in their patient silence, holding up the world that continues above them. This is what buried cities do. This is what they have always done. This is what they will always do. Rest now. The ancient world is still there, still sleeping beneath our cities, still waiting in the darkness, and it will wait forever if it must. Patient, silent, eternal in its own strange way. Good night.